You know that friend who turns everything into a joke? The one who can't have a serious conversation without throwing in a punchline? Yeah, that might be you. And before you start crafting your witty comeback, let me ask you something that might make you a little uncomfortable. What if your humor isn't just entertainment? What if it's actually your brain's security system working overtime? Look, I'm not here to kill your vibe or tell you to stop being funny. But there's a difference between genuinely enjoying humor and using it like emotional armor. And honestly, most of us are walking around in full comedy night gear without even realizing it. Think about it. When was the last time someone asked you how you're really doing and you gave them a straight answer? Not the living the dream or just another day in paradise routine, an actual answer. If you're drawing a blank, congratulations, you might be using humor as a defense mechanism. Defense mechanisms are basically your mind's way of avoiding emotional discomfort. They're like psychological bouncers at the club of your consciousness, deciding what gets in and what gets kicked to the curb. And humor? Well, humor is that really charming bouncer who makes everyone laugh while secretly making sure nothing too serious gets past the velvet rope. Here's the thing about using humor defensively. It works incredibly well. Too well, actually. Someone brings up something uncomfortable? Make a joke. Feeling vulnerable in a conversation? Throw in a sarcastic comment. Starting to have actual feelings about something? Time for a perfectly timed quip that redirects the entire conversation. It's like having a conversational escape pod that you can eject from whenever things get too real. And the beautiful part is that everyone loves the funny person. You're entertaining, you're likable, and nobody expects you to have actual problems because you're always laughing them off. But here's where it gets tricky. When humor becomes your default response to discomfort, you start missing out on authentic human connection. You become that person who's incredibly fun to be around, but somehow impossible to really know. People enjoy your company, but they can't get close to you because there's always this comedy force field protecting your actual thoughts and feelings. Let me paint you a picture. You're at dinner with friends, and someone starts talking about their recent breakup. They're being vulnerable, sharing their pain, and what do? You crack a joke about dating apps or make some comment about how their ex probably has terrible taste in Netflix shows. Everyone laughs, the mood lightens, and you've successfully avoided sitting with someone else's genuine emotion. Or maybe you're the person who turns your own struggles into comedy gold. Your job is stressful? Well, now you've got 20 minutes of material about your micromanaging boss. Your family situation is complicated? That's prime content for your next social gathering. Everything becomes a bit, and nothing gets processed. The really sneaky part about humor as a defense mechanism is that it doesn't feel defensive. It feels like you're just being yourself. After all, making people laugh is a good thing, right? You're bringing joy to the world, lightening the mood, helping people see the bright side. What could be wrong with that? Nothing, if it's genuine. But when humor becomes compulsive, when you literally cannot sit with serious emotions without deflecting them through comedy, that's when we've crossed from healthy coping into defensive territory. And before you start thinking this only applies to the class clown types, let me tell you about the subtle humor defenders. These are the people who use gentle self-deprecation to avoid real vulnerability. They'll make little jokes about their own flaws or failures, not because they think they're actually funny, but because it's easier than admitting those things genuinely hurt. You know this person. They're the one who responds to compliments with jokes about how the bar must be really low. When they mess up at work, they immediately turn it into a funny story about their incompetence rather than acknowledging they're actually disappointed in themselves. They're performing humility through humor, but they're also performing distance from their own experience. Then there's the observational humor defender. This person turns everything into social commentary. They can't just experience an awkward social situation. They have to immediately analyze it and turn it into a bit about human nature. It's like they're constantly anthropologists performing their own life rather than living it. The sarcasm specialists deserve their own category. These folks have weaponized irony to the point where sincere communication feels foreign. They speak almost entirely in subtext and eye rolls. Ask them how they're feeling about something important, and you'll get a performance that requires a decoder ring to understand what they actually mean. Now, If you're recognizing yourself in any of these descriptions, you might be getting a little defensive right now. And you know what your brain is probably trying to do? Come up with something funny to say about this whole concept. Something like, well, this is awkward, or guess I should add therapy to my comedy budget. See what I mean? The psychological function of humor as defense is actually pretty sophisticated. It serves multiple purposes simultaneously. First, it regulates your own emotions by transforming uncomfortable feelings into something more manageable. Second, it manages other people's emotions by keeping interactions light and comfortable. Third, it maintains your social image as someone who's got it all figured out. But here's what's really happening underneath all that comedy. You're essentially training yourself to avoid authentic emotional experiences. Every time you deflect a serious moment with humor, you're reinforcing the neural pathway that says, feelings are dangerous, better make a joke. Over time, this becomes so automatic that you might not even realize you're doing it. The most heartbreaking part is that humor defenders often have the deepest capacity for emotional connection. The same sensitivity that makes someone funny often makes them incredibly empathetic and emotionally intelligent. But they've learned to channel all of that emotional awareness through the filter of comedy rather than experiencing it directly. And let's talk about the social dynamics for a minute. When you're the funny person in your social circle, there's this unspoken expectation that you'll always be on. People come to rely on you for emotional regulation. Having a tense family dinner? Better make sure the funny one is there to keep things light. Friend group getting too serious? Time to call in the comedy relief. This creates a weird kind of social pressure where you become responsible for managing everyone else's comfort level. You can't have an off day without people asking what's wrong in a way that suggests you're failing at your designated role. You become an emotional service provider, but who's providing emotional service to you? Here's something that might blow your mind. The people who love you actually want to know who you are underneath the humor. They want to connect with the real you, not just your comedy persona. But when humor is your primary mode of communication, you're essentially asking people to love a performance rather than a person. This doesn't mean you need to stop being funny. Humor is an incredible human capacity and a genuine source of joy and connection. The goal isn't to eliminate humor from your life. It's to develop other ways of relating to difficult emotions so that humor becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. By the way, if you're getting value from this exploration of psychological patterns, consider subscribing to the channel. We dive deep into the fascinating ways our minds work, and I promise to keep serving up insights that are both entertaining and genuinely useful for understanding yourself better. The first step in addressing humor as a defense mechanism is simply noticing when you're doing it. Start paying attention to your impulse to make jokes, especially in moments that call for sincerity or vulnerability. Notice if there's a little voice in your head that says, "This is getting too heavy, better lighten things up," every time a conversation gets real. You might be surprised by how often this happens once you start looking for it. That moment when someone asks how you're really handling a difficult situation, and you feel the joke forming before you've even processed the question. The automatic reach for sarcasm when someone gives you genuine praise. The compulsive need to turn your own pain into entertainment. The next step is experimenting with sitting in discomfort without immediately reaching for the humor escape hatch. This is harder than it sounds because discomfort is, well, uncomfortable. But here's the thing about emotions, even the difficult ones. They're actually quite manageable when you stop running from them. Try this experiment. Next time you feel the urge to deflect with humor, pause for just 10 seconds. Breathe. Let yourself feel whatever is coming up without immediately transforming it into comedy material. Notice that feelings, even intense ones, don't actually kill you. They just feel big for a while and then they change. You might discover that underneath the impulse to joke is actually something pretty important trying to get your attention. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you're sad. Maybe you're frustrated or disappointed or overwhelmed. These emotions have information for you, but you can't receive that information if you're immediately converting everything into content. Another thing to watch for is the difference between humor that connects and humor that distances. Connecting humor acknowledges shared human experience and builds intimacy. Distancing humor keeps people at arm's length and maintains your image as someone who's got everything under control. Here's a simple test. After you make a joke in a serious moment, ask yourself, did that bring me closer to the people I'm with, or did it help me avoid something I didn't want to face? The answer will tell you whether you're using humor as connection or as protection. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. What if you discover that underneath all the humor, you're actually dealing with some pretty heavy stuff? What if your comedy defense mechanism has been protecting you from feelings that genuinely need attention? This is where I need to mention that if you're recognizing patterns that are significantly impacting your mental health or relationships, this video is for information and entertainment purposes only. Professional support can provide personalized guidance for working through defensive patterns and developing healthier coping strategies. The goal isn't to become a humorless person who takes everything deadly seriously. Humor is one of humanity's greatest gifts. The goal is to have humor as one tool in your emotional toolkit rather than your only tool. To be able to choose when to use humor rather than being compulsively driven to it every time things get uncomfortable. Think about the people you feel most connected to in your life. Chances are they're people you can be serious with as well as people you can laugh with. They're people who've seen you in your full range of human experience, not just your greatest hits comedy collection. When you start allowing yourself to have authentic emotional experiences instead of immediately converting them to entertainment, something interesting happens. Your humor actually gets better. It becomes more genuine, more connected to real human experience rather than defensive performance art. Plus, you start attracting different kinds of relationships. Instead of people who enjoy your comedy show but don't really know you, you start connecting with people who appreciate your humor but also want to know your thoughts, fears, dreams, and yes, even your struggles. The irony is that by being less funny in the defensive sense, you often become more genuinely funny. When humor comes from authentic observation rather than emotional avoidance, it tends to be more insightful, more relatable, and more connecting. So the next time someone asks you how you're really doing, try giving them an actual answer instead of your usual comedic deflection. You might be surprised by what happens when you let people see the person behind the punchlines. Here's something wild to consider. Your humor might actually be one of your greatest strengths, but only when it's coming from authenticity rather than avoidance. The same sensitivity that makes you funny could make you incredibly emotionally intelligent if you stopped being afraid of feeling things directly. Maybe it's time to find out who you are when you're not performing. That person might be even more interesting than your comedy persona, and they definitely deserve to be known.